Greetings everybody. We are here celebrating the Passover season with unleavened bread. We're here at Twofold Bay in Eden, and we're going to discuss now of what the Bible speaks about in regards to the two resurrections, what the early church kept and how it got changed by other groups to serve false purposes. So Wade, what do you think about all this?
Well, the Bible's quite clear that no one's going to heaven. There are only the resurrections of the dead. And the Old Testament prophets talk about that. Ezekiel talks about that. And nowhere in ancient Israel did they believe that anyone was going to heaven for any purpose. And the Bible's quite clear that the only person who's ever gone to heaven is Jesus Christ, who came down from heaven in John. So what happened was that when the church was formed, we understood that the resurrection of the dead and the church of God from the time of Christ has kept the doctrines sound for the resurrections of the dead for 2,000 years. Now, what happened in the 2nd century, Gnosticism intruded into the church in the 1st century, and Paul had a serious problem dealing with it in the different churches, particularly the Colossians and the heresies in Colossae and other areas, and it was intruding from Gnosticism. And Gnosticism was a system developed in Alexandria in the 2nd century BCE through to the 1st century and into the 1st century, the Christian era. And they developed this Gnostic doctrine, and they developed, it was a parasite religion, and it intruded on the pagan religions and was developed for that, and onto Judaism, so that they could intrude into Judaism and then alter the structure of their being and their faith. What they were told amongst the Gnostics was that this evil god Jaldabaoth had given this law to Moses, and that they developed it through into Christianity to say that this new God, Jesus Christ, had developed the structure of a better law, a more kinder law, and that you didn't have to do these things that this previous God had said. All of it was lies.
Right, and like the introduction of liberalism, watering down things to make things more palatable and easier to comprehend for most.
Yes, it was done. Finally, they got the Jewish version of Gnosticism that had been developed at Alexandria. They developed that for Christianity and then tried to intrude it all over the place, so that and the pagan systems under the sun and mystery cults were also intruded in the Middle East, so that they were just variations on the theme, and that basically everyone was going to heaven. Now, the story of the Gnostics was that they would go to heaven up through the Milky Way.
Right.
And Jaldabaoth would try and stop them from getting to heaven. And he had implemented this legal system which would stop them from getting through the Milky Way to heaven when they were dead. Now, of course, that is nothing to do with the Bible.
I was going to say the Bible is quite clear that there's certain qualifications that puts you in the first or the second resurrection, aren't they?
Yeah.
And these people, they alleviate that by saying, well, we're all just going off to heaven. So they can then bypass the law, bypass the commandments. They like to think they're keeping them, but if I don't, it doesn't matter because Christ has done it all, I can just take off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not under the judgment from the law anymore. So all of that was comfortable for these people coming in from the sun and mystery cults. Now, in Rome, in the 1st century BC, the sun cults were established. Firstly, there were some Cilician pirates captured in 63 BC and brought into Rome, and they introduced the Mithras system. The Mithras was formed the mystery elements of the sun cults.
Right.
And that penetrated the Roman army from 63 BC and became the religion. And even their Roman army drills were based on the cult of Mithras. Now the public form of that was Elagaballism. Elagabal was the Sun Invictus Elagabal was the public form, and that formed the religious system in Rome right up through until the 3rd century. There were elements of that, and they tried to reintroduce it in the 3rd century under one of the emperors, Julian the Apostate. But what happened was that the system in the Christian church in Rome was intruded on by the worship of the god Attis. And they used to carry on an equilateral sun cross, they carried this figure stretched out who had been crucified, or that is, they called it crucified, on a sun cross. The sun cross was really just the means of conveying him around Rome.
Right.
So the dead body was there as
On display.
crucifix
Right.
on display while they carried around Rome, and it was the equilateral sun cross. Nothing to do with Christianity at all.
Right.
And that's where those games are played where you see people carrying the cross, Christ on the cross around different parts of the Middle East and in Rome and Europe. But the fact of the matter is, it was never done in Christianity. Christ, we'll talk about the means of the execution of Christ later, but the reality was that this system of Attis intruded into Christianity, and then their people came into Christianity and they just took over Christianity with these pagan sun-worshipping cults. And they did the same to Christianity, early Christianity, as they did to later Islam, which was a Christian element of the church.
Yeah.
And they then brought in the worship of the Hubal and the sun gods into Islam to destroy it as they destroyed Christianity.
Yeah.
But most people now, you talk to the people that at any town, and you go out and you talk to somebody and you say, what happens when you die? And they'll say, oh, we go to heaven. Where's Grandma? Oh, she's up in heaven looking down on
And
us.
it's just carried on through the ages as the mainstream belief.
Yes, and it's an absolute fabrication.
Right. Yes.
There is no movement into heaven. The plan of God is detailed in the plan of salvation. He wanted to make people gods, Elohim. He wanted to add to the sons of God that he'd already created. And he created humans so that the sons of God could become more responsible for a being in their care to get them through to become Elohim to the first resurrection.
Right.
But that didn't quite, Satan didn't want to do that. he didn't want humans. He didn't think they were good enough, because he'd experimented with all these humanoid forms earlier, before Adam was created.
Right, and that's where we get what's called the hominids.
Yes, yes.
Which
yeah,
people
the humanoids in the
automatically equate to the false theory of evolution.
yes.
That
So
we
you get
descended
Neanderthals,
from these upright
Cro-Magnons.
hominids, which is totally false as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, Neanderthals and Cro-Magnons developed over the 100-odd thousand years, and then we ended up with people in Australia as well of these Cro-Magnons, and they developed. Now the Aboriginals were not the first groups here. They replaced a human short pygmy type people.
Right.
And they killed them all.
Okay, right.
And there were Cro-Magnons here, and before the Cro-Magnons even, they were the earliest form. For instance, the Cow Swamp people and Lake Mungo.
Mungo, that's a familiar term, right?
Lake Mungo male was allegedly 60,000 years old.
Right.
Lake Mungo male was dated as 60,000 years, but my understanding and the explanations the scientific or archaeological explanations I have, is that there were items found since they found a rock in the cavity area of the skeleton, and then one of the professors decided that he had swallowed the rock in order to help his indigestion. So they then dated the rock, and they determined that would make him 60,000 years or X amount of thousands of years old. And that, of course, was a fabrication completely. And there was no reality to that. There also, though, we know that 13,000 years ago, this coast here was further out.
Right.
And you've seen all of this. You're looking out now at the Tasman Sea, which is at the southern end of the Pacific Ocean. Now this area was down lower some 30 metres, and there was a carton tool technology, civilization. People 13,000 years ago were making carton tools, the particular type of stone tools, and they lived out here as well and right up through into the coast. Now we've dealt with that in B5, the creation series. Those people disappeared because when the caps, one of the caps melted, it raised sea levels up to the current level.
Sure, right. Yep.
And that enabled, and the sea levels fluctuate because of the global warming sequence. Every 1100 cycles, which runs for 11.1 years per cycle, the whole world temperatures rise by a number of degrees. It's a solar impact. It's got nothing to do with human activity. It was happening long before humans were created.
Well, that's right, and that's provable in the core samples that they excavate and test under the microscope and various dating means.
Yes, yeah. It's this global warming, man-made global warming, is a fiction by the globalist system running out of the UN.
Right.
And through Davos with the World Economic Forum. It's a political exercise to take control of human activity and social structures. Anyone who tries to convince you that the the global system occurs because of man-made activity doesn't know what they're talking about.
No.
The previous cycle was in the 900s, that is the 9th century AD. It was called the medieval warm period,
Right.
and the Greenland cap melted in the 9th century AD, and one of our North Celt ancestors, Eric the Red, killed a Thane in Iceland at a banquet.
Right.
So to prevent a family feud and a war in Iceland, they packed up and moved to Greenland.
Right.
And they were there and farmed Greenland for 450 years under that global warming period.
Right, which was temperate, and they were able to grow potatoes, and the ice cap was basically non-existent in the interior.
Well, I don't think they grew potatoes, but they were certainly able to run cattle and
right, and hopefully some greens, right.
Yeah. So what happened then in 1450,
Right.
it dropped into a mini ice age,
Right.
as it had been doing for centuries upon centuries.
Yeah,
And I
right.
think the development of the cart and tool technology here out on the shelf, what is now the continental shelf of Australia, was part of that fluctuation, the system, and they were doing that. All that system was wiped out around 12,000 BC, or 12,000 years ago.
Right, yeah.
We know those people were killed,
Yep.
and that was the tohu and bohu of Genesis 1:1.
Right. And all those people back from them who have passed are still in the ground in some form.
Yeah.
They have not flooded off to
Yeah,
heaven.
nobody's flooded off to heaven.
So, it's quite clear through the Bible at different points. I think Psalms 115 talks about silence in the grave,
Yes,
and then later on it talks about darkness in the grave,
yes.
and then you come up to Revelation and it's quite specific. It talks about a first and second resurrection.
Yes.
Revelation 20, yes.
Yes, and Revelation 20 encapsulates the whole thing. That's why people don't even want to read Revelation 20, because it tells you you're not going to heaven. There are two resurrections of the dead, and the first resurrection is at the beginning of the millennial 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ, and the second resurrection is at the end of the millennial 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ.
Right, as it says, it's quite clear in Revelation 20, verse 5. There's the distinction there. So, Wade, what is the main distinctive factor which separates the two? Like, the first resurrection is only going to be a select few that qualify.
Well, it's the people who do what they're told.
Right.
God's given us the contract. You keep the law and the testimony of the apostles and prophets in Christ, and you keep the calendar which flows from the law, and God's going to make us gods, Elohim, sons of God. Yeah. So the same as Christ and the heavenly hosts were made sons of God, we're going to be made sons of God.
Right.
All we've got to do is do what we're told, obey God.
Right, but unfortunately the antinomian satanic replacement theological system has not only changed the laws, they've also changed the times.
Yes.
Meaning the calendar system.
Yes. Yes, they've changed the calendar system where they no longer keep the Sabbaths and the calendar from the new moons, from one new moon to the next, determining the sequence of the year. And it's all based on the conjunction. You don't have to look at anything. You can calculate
it's all calculable, yeah.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
And we've calculated it now for 100 years in advance, and we're publishing the new updated calendar through till 21-27.
Right, wonderful.
And it's done in the astronomical schools, and that's what Philo says in the 1st century BC and AD. he was writing over the time of Christ.
Right.
He said that the calendar is based on the new moons, which are determined from one conjunction to the next.
To the next, right, that's right.
And so there's no fascinated sort of mystical observe the crescent.
No, we don't have to stare at the moon to see if there's any light on either side.
No.
That's
And that's a heresy.
Yeah.
This observation of the moon system comes from the worship of the god's sin, which is, we will talk about the golden calf later, which intruded even at Sinai. And this determination of the sun system and the sin was the moon god. And the structure of this crescent has got nothing to do with the determination of the biblical calendar.
Right.
Now the biblical calendar was determined from Adam. It wasn't determined from Moses. It was Adam, right through the patriarchs. Noah determined the first day of the first month. Right? He knew when the new moon of the first month would occur. He knew when the flood finished. He was able to determine the first day of the first month and determine the sequence, the exact sequence of when God wiped out the earth and when the ark was rested on Ararat.
On the land, right.
Yes.
Yeah.
All of that was determined according to God's calendar. And it was all determined and understood from Noah right through to Abraham. And then Abraham understood the calendars and he understood the structure of the law. God had given him his covenant, and he said that, you people are going into your people are going into captivity. Well, Abraham didn't even have children then, but he said your offspring will go into Egypt and go and be in captivity, and they did, and they went there for 430 years, and they were in captivity for 400 years, and that structure was all understood. They lost some of the understanding amongst the people in Egypt. So Christ, who was the subordinate God of Israel, he was appointed by Eloah, by God, Father, one true God. He was appointed and given Israel as his inheritance, and we understand that from Deuteronomy 32 verses 8 to 9.
Right.
Now, he was told by God to go in and appoint Moses and pull Egypt out. They had identified Moses and taken him out of Egypt when he was 40. And all of these are critical points. He took Moses out at 40 and put him into Midian. He then started to train him under Jethro, priest of Midian, who was his father-in-law. He married the daughter of Jethro, priest of Midian. Now, Jethro's name was Hobab, but Jethro is the name of the priestly function in Midian. So Midian was one of the tribes of Abraham. He was told that, and he wrote the book of Job in Midian. The first book of the Bible written was the book of Job. And you can see that Job was one of the sons of Issachar. And all the people in Job are characters of the pre-Exodus function of the different tribes that are derived from Abraham and the nations.
Right, fascinating. Yeah.
So Christ then grabbed hold of of Moses, and he said, now, when Moses was 80, he says, you now go into Egypt and you approach Pharaoh and you tell them to let my people go.
Right.
And that was
That
the
started the
sequence.
Exodus.
Right.
Yes, that started the Exodus. Now, they all knew what the function of the biblical system was. They didn't need Moses to write it down for the patriarchs to have understood it for the previous 3,500 years.
Yeah.
So 3,000 years. What God then did was to take Christ, and he gave the law to Moses at Sinai, and that was then written down, and that legal structure simply carried on from what had been given to Noah and Abraham, Adam before them.
Right.
So that all of them were carrying the same legal system, the same understanding, and the same understanding of what happens when you die, and they were all looking forward to the resurrection of the dead.
Right.
There was no thought in any of them that they were going to heaven for any reason.
Right. Yeah.
So that structure continued on until these Gnostics were formed in the 2nd century BC. No one's ever going to heaven except in the pagan systems. And
But
the Gnostic,
under their determination, under
their
free will
determination.
thinking.
Yeah.
And Gnosticism started off within Greek philosophy,
Yes.
I've been told.
No, it was started off basically in Alexandria.
Right.
The Gnosticism that came into Judah came from the Jews in Alexandria.
Right.
And they reorganized their system of understanding, and the pagans developed theirs. Gnosticism was this parasite religion that was impressed or imposed on paganism, on Judaism, and then it was developed and brought into Christianity.
When Christianity.
Yeah, and it has nothing to do with the biblical structure. It's a pagan system.
Yeah. Yep.
And it was developed as a social construct in Judaism in the 2nd century BC. And Green's written the history of that,
Right.
and it's a very, very important work to understand where it comes from. Because when you say, when you die, you go to heaven, you're actually mouthing Gnostic propaganda. It's got nothing to do with the Bible.
Which identifies that you are false.
Yes.
In regards to Josephus.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's right. Anybody that says that when I die I go to heaven is not a true Christian.
No,
That's right. That's
like
the way you
It's
told.
like you're swinging a cross around your neck. It's displaying something you shouldn't.
As we discussed in the Heaven, Hell and the First Resurrection paper, the Justin Martyr said in 154 in his dialogue with Trypho in chapter 80, he said, when you come across people who say they are Christians and that when they die they go to heaven, do not believe them. They are not. And he just said they are not. But he meant they are not Christians.
Yeah.
And that's the way you told a fake from a true Christian. In the 2nd century AD, anyone who said that when they died they go to heaven, you knew they were fakes.
Right.
You knew that they were these Gnostic heretics.
But these days it's mainstream.
Yes, and what's happened is that they've taken over the church by military means from Rome in the 2nd century, and then this heresy has become mainstream. And the reason it became mainstream was because people didn't want to keep the laws of God.
Right.
That's the only reason. This doctrine of heaven and hell became mainstream in Christianity was in order to control the populace, and hell was invented so that you could threaten them with something if they didn't obey
Right.
you.
Forced compliance.
It's forced compliance.
Oh, shocking.
And that's where it came from. That's where these people are going.
Yeah.
And America is full of these people now who say that it's only the Jews that look forward to the resurrection of the dead, and I've heard them say it.
Right.
We've all heard them say it.
Yep.
And what they're trying to do is then say, oh well, we're going to heaven, but these Jews are looking to the resurrection of the dead. Sorry, that's the entire Christian faith from the 1st and 2nd century AD. And they don't understand that. Now, most people have no idea of what the plan is, and that's why we are going to have the first resurrection of the dead in the near future, the return of the Messiah, will run the earth for 1,000 years, and they'll reorganise in preparation for the second resurrection.
Right, in 1,000 years' time.
Yes.
And they'll be all re-educated into the truth of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're going to resurrect, God's going to resurrect all of them,
Yep.
and then we'll literally give them their toothbrush and their robe and their sandals,
So,
Teach them how to do it. Right.
and we'll re-educate them, and
Yes,
they'll
right.
be taught the truth. And it'll be 100 years of redirection, re-education of the world. Everyone that's ever lived will be properly educated, properly made to understand that what their future is, and they will then develop and become Elohim. That's
Right.
They will develop it and then be translated into another dimensional being. We are third dimensional people, creatures now, but we will be translated into fourth dimensional creatures in the same way that the Elohim are now.
Yes, right.
And we can appear and whatever and do certain capacities of movement, transport, and they're way beyond what we're able to do now.
For sure.
Well, all right, Wade. I mean, look, it's a lovely morning here. We could go on for a while. We've got a few other papers that we're going to cover during the day. But yeah, there is a paper 143, Resurrection,
Yes,
and that covers a lot of these things that we've been talking about. And
143, 143A and 143B.
Right.
and
Yep.
look, you know, you read these alongside of your Bible, and you won't get led astray.
That's right.
You'll see the truth of what's really there, what's really been set forward, and you can put that up against what you think you know and see what you come up with.
Exactly, yeah. And they're all explicit and fully in detail.
Right.
Nothing's been overlooked, and so that's the recommended path that you take.
So, all right, well, it's a good start. We'll see you again soon.
Bye.